a show about Jewish books, music, film, and web. I'm Heidi Estrin. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida. Additional support comes from the Association of Jewish Libraries. Maggie Anton is well known for her historical fiction trilogy, Rashi's Daughters, and now she's found another daughter to write about. Her newest book is Rav Hisda's Daughter, a novel of love, the Talmud, and sorcery. Part 1, Apprentice. I spoke to Maggie about her fascinating new novel at B'nai Torah Congregation in Boca Raton when she came down for a mini book tour. So, Maggie Anton, welcome to Florida.
Thank you. It's nice to be here, particularly in January.
So we're here to talk about Rav Hisda's Daughter, your newest book. And Rav Hisda's daughter was a real person, so please explain who she was.
Okay, first of all, Rav Hisda's daughter is the woman who is mentioned in more different places in the Talmud than any other woman. We're talking 3rd century Babylonia is where she lives, Babylonia being now its modern-day Iraq. And Rav Hisda is one of the rabbis, the early rabbis, who are actually creating Talmud. There is no Talmud in 3rd century. There's Mishnah, and then there's all the rabbis who are trying to make sense out of Mishnah and take care of the fact that there's contradictions between different Mishnayot, and have questions about Mishnah. And all of those questions over several hundred years turns into the Gemara, and Mishnah and Gemara together is what we think of as Talmud.
Okay. And why was Rav Hisda's daughter significant? Why did you choose to write about her?
Okay, that was easy. I had her in my mind way back in the early 1990s when I started studying in a women's Talmud group with Rachel Adler. I came across a passage of Talmud. It's actually in Bava Batra 12b, where Rav Hisda's daughter is a child. She's maybe, 9 years old, something like that. And she's in the classroom with her father. And depending on your translation, she's either sitting on his lap or she's sitting next to him. And he calls up his 2 best students and asks her, "Who do you want to marry?" Which is pretty amazing, considering 3rd century Babylonia. You would think a 9-year-old girl wouldn't get any kind of choice at all. Maybe just yes or no, as if you could say no to the guy that your parents picked out, right, at that age.
And is 9 a normal age to be thinking about that at that time?
Yeah, girls were pretty much betrothed by the time they're 12. Mm-hmm. So this is a normal time period. Okay, not only are the 2 suitors standing in front of her, right? She's supposed to make a choice and they're there in front of her, but this is in front of the entire class. So it's a rather interesting situation, shall we say. And how does she answer? She says, both of them. Yes. And the younger of the 2 guys, arguably more quick-witted, says, "I'll be the last one." And the Talmud tells us that is what happens. First she marries the older one, she has some kids with him, then she's widowed, then she marries the younger one, has more kids with him, and her second husband is the guy that is known as Rava. He is mentioned more places in the Talmud than anybody. He's over 4,000 times in the Talmud. He is the epitome of the Talmudic rabbi. So she is involved in a very important, her father's important, but her second husband even more so. But I was just fascinated, what kind of girl, when given the choice of 2 guys, says both of them. I mean, it just couldn't get her out of my mind. And after Rashi's Daughters was successful and the 3rd book was done, Penguin, my publishers, kind of asked, "Do you have anything else, anything else in mind to write about?" And I said, I think I know who's going to be the subject of my next series. Mm-hmm.
The subtitle of the book, Rav Hisda's Daughter, is A Novel of Love, the Talmud, and Sorcery, and that is quite a tagline. So can you kind of unpack that for us?
I must admit that when I originally thought I was going to write Rav Hisda's Daughter, I thought the byline would be like Rashi's Daughters, Love the Talmud in medieval France. It's going to be Love the Talmud in 3rd century Babylonia or something like that. But then, of course, the tricky part in writing about a character, Rav Hisda's daughter, is like, what is her name? That's what the Talmud calls her. But I was looking for sources of authentic Jewish women's names from Babylonia. I didn't think I'd find anything, but I couldn't just give up and say there wasn't. And I started doing some research into the time, and I discovered Babylonian incantation bowls, which are regular pottery bowls. Actually, they're more like a cup. And they are created between 4th and 6th century in Babylonia, in the exact places where the Talmud was being written. They're clearly written by Jews. They call upon Jewish angels, Adonai Sevaot. They quote Torah. Some of them even quote Mishnah. And these are magic spells written on the inside of bowls, which were buried under people's houses to protect them from demons, from the evil eye, from all kinds of illnesses and nasty stuff. And just like Mishaberach, they're written in the name of the person's mother. So it's like, great, I got lots and lots of Jewish women's names. And then I started thinking, after I was happy to have the names, and I only looked at indexes of names, like, what are these bowls? Who wrote them? What's going on here? And does the Talmud know about this? It's the same time, the same place. And I started looking through the Talmud for pieces of Talmud about sorcery, about amulets, about these kinds of written spells. And I discovered quite a lot. This is not the pieces of Gemara they do in yeshivot. And I found out Rav Hisda casts spells. I found out that his daughter knows how to protect her husband from demons in the privy.
Demons in the privy.
Yes. That's Shaviti is actually the... and you could ask me how you protect yourself, because that's actually interesting.
How do you protect yourself in the privy, and why are there demons in the privy?
Oh, because demons like to live in nasty, disgusting places, and so it doesn't get more...
Right.
These are outhouses, kind of privies. And actually, we learn that the magical procedure to protect yourself from demons in the privy is you come out and you wash your hands 3 times.
Aha.
The Talmud tells us. Because heaven forbid you should not do this. And you touch your eye, well, the demons will get in your eye. Next thing you know, you're going to go blind. If you touch your nose, they're going to get in there. You'll have all kinds of respiratory stuff. And, worst of all, if you should not wash your hands and touch your mouth, you will have every kind of intestinal disease like they didn't even have in Egypt. So, and of course, does that work? Of course it works.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I was learning more and more about sorcery, and the Talmud rabbis, they talk about sorceresses all the time. The rabbis don't actually even condemn them. As a matter of fact, they tell you how to find a good one. I mean, if you need an amulet, if you need a magic spell, how do you know the person you go to is competent? How do you know the spell is proven? And at some point, I realized, wait a second. We have these incantation bowls. Thousands and thousands have been unearthed in the areas where they found them, under every house. So, sorcery is the province of women. What women would be writing these? To be literate in Hebrew, to know Torah, to know Mishnah? Of course, it's the women in the rabbis' families. No wonder the rabbis don't complain about them. It's their wives and their mothers and their sisters. And then I realized, well, my character knows how to protect against demons in the privy. She's a sorceress. Well, if I'm going to start the novel when she's like 8 or 9, because I have to include that crucial scene with the 2 guys, then I'm going to have to show her training. I'm going to have to show her becoming a sorceress. And book 1 is book 1, Apprentice. And I started learning all about Jewish magic, which was not even on my radar when I decided to write this book. And I have lots of incantations and spells that she learns. I'm not going to say don't do this at home, but but I use the real ones. It's not like J.K. Rowling where she made up the spells in Harry Potter. These are, I'm not going to say whether they work, but they are real, authentic spells from amulets, from incantation bowls, or from the Talmud. There's actually lots of spells the rabbis tell you what they are in the Talmud, how to cure various illnesses via spells.
So can you tell us some more spells?
Okay, so this is from an incantation bowl, clearly designed to protect a pregnant woman. And there's no question, as you'll hear, that this is a Jewish spell. By the name of Shaddai, Savaot, Adonai, and by the powers of the 7 angels who are appointed over the 7 days of the week, Mikael, Gabriel, Samael, Raphael, Zadkiel, Aniel, and Kafziel, that you should stand with all your might, power, and strength to withstand all those who damage and pain and inflict illness on the woman Ronei bat Medak. Cause all kinds of demons to flee from her, as well as Lilith, Ruchim, all kinds of fear, trembling, and weakness of heart, and all kinds of pain, that she should be healthy and preserved, and she should not miscarry her fetus. I further adjure you, all kinds of Liliths and Ruchims that enter the entrails of women and spoil their offspring, in the name of Mikael your master and Ashmedai your king, that you should move, go, flee, keep away from the woman Ronei bat Medak, and that you should not ever again come near to her. If you transgress against this my adjuration, I will strike you with the iron rods that are the four holy mothers, Bilhah, Rachel, Zilpah, Leah. Amen, amen, Selah. So, clearly Jewish. Interestingly, the four holy mothers are not exactly the four matriarchs that we think of, but that's because when it talks about spiting you with the iron rods, Bilhah, Rachel, Zilpah, Leah, those initials spell Barzel, which is the Hebrew word for iron. And that's how it's all connected. And iron was considered particularly efficacious against the demons and Liliths that would hurt a laboring woman. Mm-hmm. In those days, in Rashi's time too, you would bring metal into the lying-in chamber, the laboring room, the husband's sword or knife or his belt. Nowadays, of course, it doesn't matter. We're all having babies in hospitals and there's metal every place, so you don't need to bring any in there. So this is very common that you would find in an incantation bowl to protect a pregnant woman. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to read another one, which is from the Talmud, and it is for an amulet. So this is one that... Actually, Rav Hisda.
The difference is that an amulet is something you wear.
Yeah, amulet is something you wear. And the amulet spells will be much shorter because you have to get them on a little tiny piece of parchment that fits inside of something. And this is a spell for an amulet that Rav Hisda tells us in the Talmud. So I particularly wanted to use Rav Hisda's spell. And we're talking in those days when it was very dangerous to be a merchant. You know, there were pirates, there were bandits. Heaven forbid you should get to where you're going and there's another merchant with the same stuff cheaper. You needed supernatural help. So here's one that he says is for an amulet that a merchant would wear. We're using the name of Tachlifa Bar Haviva is who this amulet's for. May it be your will, Adonai Savaot, that you conduct Tachlifa Bar Haviva in peace, direct his footsteps in peace, and uphold him in peace. Deliver him from the hand of every foe and ambush along the way. Send blessing on his handiwork and grant him grace, loving kindness, and mercy in your eyes and in the eyes of all who behold Tachlifa Bar Haviva. Blessed are you, Adonai Savaot, who hearkens unto prayer. Amen, amen, Selah. And you may find that familiar, or people listening to the podcast. If you've ever heard the Traveler's Blessing, seen a car mezuzah, and it's much longer now. The prayers never get shorter, they only get longer. But the origin of what we consider the Traveler's Blessing is from the Talmud, and it's an incantation for merchants or anyone else who is going on a journey. And it's Rav Hisda's incantation.
That is very cool.
So I wanted to be sure to include that one.
Right, of course.
And I'll have more. I mean, there's a love spell in here. There's a curse spell. Which don't do that at home.
Right.
I give examples of various different kinds of incantations.
So you're saying do this at home, but don't do that at home, and you're saying the washing hands one obviously works. We have different reasons for why it works than what they were thinking, but do you feel like these were efficacious, these spells?
I'm going to say maybe. We know the placebo effect is real. Mm-hmm. And certainly if you're writing amulets and incantation bowls to protect pregnant women or children from illness, the majority of women did not die in childbirth. The majority of kids did not die of illness, so they would have appeared to work. Curse spells, I don't know. The love spells were public, so that a woman would know that a man had commissioned a love spell that said, may the heart of so-and-so burn, this particular woman. She would know that he wanted her. Mm-hmm. So that could have
An effect.
An effect of getting them together. There is an amulet, that was one of my favorite spells, for winning at chariot races. I don't think that would have had any effect whatsoever, particularly if everybody in the stadium is wearing an amulet to win at chariot races. How's that going to work? But most of the Jewish amulets and the vast majority of incantation bowls are protective. They are to protect you from the evil eye, from demons, from various evil spirits. The first one I read was very typical. Okay. So it can't hurt if you do it at home.
Yeah, that's right. It couldn't hurt, as they say. So Hisda is a fairly strong character, and it didn't feel like you were giving her an inappropriate proto-feminist kind of outlook, as many historical fiction books tend to try to put modern sensibilities into past times. So what makes her able to be so independent in this ancient patriarchal culture in which she lives?
She comes from a very wealthy family. Nowadays, if we want to talk about like who's rich, we'll say George Soros or Warren Buffett, Bill Gates. Well, in the Talmud, you want to talk about who's rich, it's Rav Hisda. Rav Hisda is incredibly wealthy. He's a brewer. He makes beer. She has 7 older brothers. She does guys' stuff. That's why she's in the classroom. She's following her brothers around and she's doing what they do. And her mother, sister, is married to the exilarch, like the Jewish king or vassal king in Babylonia. So her mother's family is very connected politically and has lots of power. She has really control of her life that the average woman doesn't. And I tried to include some average women, at least as her clients, who would be coming to her for spells so that you could see this. In terms of this time period, I know Rav Hisda has slaves. Slavery is ubiquitous in the ancient world. And having to write from someone who's a slave owner, she has slaves, that mindset is not the 21st century mindset. She doesn't think there's anything wrong with having slaves. Trying not to be a 21st century feminist, even though I am, right. But to make it quite clear this is another time, and I'm writing from her voice, not my voice.
Yeah, I was going to mention that too about the slavery. So that's interesting that you managed to really keep it to the mindset of the time period, and yet because of her particular situation, she's somebody that modern feminists can relate to. So that works out for all of us.
Yeah, and when it comes to the rabbis who have slaves, Rav Hisda seems to be a bit more enlightened, if we could use that word, compared to some of the other rabbis. His slaves ate the same white bread that the family ate. So his slaves were not like his goats. They were treated for their time very well. And when you consider the average woman back then, when she got married, the difference between being her husband's slave and her husband's wife is that you can't sell a wife to another guy. Your slave, you could sell. But really, at that level of society, there wasn't much difference.
You mentioned that Rav Hisda was a brewer, and this brings me to something that I wanted to point out. The book really reminded me of Little House on the Prairie. And I don't know if you've gotten this reaction before.
No, I haven't.
You know how in Little House on the Prairie, in the whole series, they take great pains to describe exactly how they built the log cabin and how they made the maple syrup. And in this book, you did the same kind of thing with describing how did they brew the beer and how did they lay a mosaic tile floor. And so it really had that same feeling to me of getting down into the nitty-gritty of the processes of life at that time.
I admit I was a huge fan, and still am, of the Little House on the Prairie series. I actually own all of them. And thinking about it, I did find that kind of stuff fascinating. That was not a template for me in the way that the All of a Kind family was, in that you're embedded in a Jewish household from a long time ago, and you get to eat with the family and go to services with them and do all the Jewish life cycle events and things like that with them. But another book that influenced me was the Clan of the Cave Bear series by Jane Auel, especially the first couple, where you're in prehistoric times and they have all the herbs and how did they dry leather and you really learn all this cool stuff. So I liked that. I mean, my goal in writing these books was I was writing the book that I wanted to read. So I put stuff in that I found interesting. And I liked learning how they did stuff in the olden days. As I've come to see, if I'm interested in it, my readers will find it interesting as well.
Yeah, it was. It was very interesting. So your earlier trilogy, Rashi's Daughters, is also historical fiction. And in this book, you include all these Talmudic figures as well as historical figures. So how is creating this book different from creating your earlier books?
First of all, Rashi and his daughters are real historical figures. Mm-hmm. They're not just names in a Talmud commentary. And the daughters' names really are Rachel, Miriam, and Yocheved. We know that from other extraneous sources. The Talmud is completely self-referential. There's no place that any of these people are mentioned in any other contemporary sources. Even rabbis are not mentioned elsewhere. We think of Hillel and Shammai, these really famous guys. But outside the Talmud, nowhere. This is a small handful of beleaguered guys who are trying to reinvigorate Judaism after the temple's been destroyed. How are we going to do Judaism when we can't go to Jerusalem and make sacrifices anymore? We can't do our holiday observances anymore the way we have for all these thousands of years. And the rabbis come up with new ways to do it. At the time, most Jews, they never heard of a rabbi. I mean, there's 1 million Jews in Babylonia in the 3rd century. They've been there since Nebuchadnezzar took them out with the first temple being destroyed. And as far as they're concerned, who are these rabbis that give themselves this authority to come up with all this new stuff? Now I got to say blessings. And now we're going to read Torah in synagogue, and which Torah we're going to read. What's this new stuff on Yom Kippur where it used to be the high priest made atonement for everybody. But no, now I got to fast, and I got to make atonement for myself, and I have to say all these prayers. And I mean, Yom Kippur, the way we do it is completely rabbinic from the Talmud. Mm-hmm. Now we're supposed to, instead of Passover, going to Jerusalem and eating a lamb there, we now have a Seder, we have to drink 4 cups of wine, we ask these questions.
So if most of the Jews in Babylonia never heard about this, how did it then become widespread practice?
Well, first of all, the temple didn't get rebuilt, so Jews are more and more open to what are we going to do? And the rabbis were persuasive. I mean, Rava in particular goes to the synagogues. He gives drashas connecting the rabbinic practices to Torah verses. Apparently he's incredibly charismatic. People come to hear him, and slowly but surely the rabbis changed the opinion of Jews to what we have today, where the Talmud is the source of all the traditions and all the laws that Jews follow. We are rabbinic Jews, and even the Jews who don't do Judaism, it's rabbinic Judaism they don't do. This is probably one of the most crucial parts of Jewish history, is how Judaism reinvented itself when the temple was destroyed and managed to carry on for another 1,500 years.
So to get back to the unique challenge of writing this book as opposed to your earlier historical fiction, because it's not straight history as much as the other one was.
Right, and there's no index to the Talmud. We're talking about, 73 tractates. Finding stuff about Rav Hisda or his daughter is like a needle in the haystack. I really had to rely on other scholars, Talmudic scholars, to be able to point me in directions of information that I needed. And this is where it really helped having written Rashi's Daughters first. Mm-hmm. I was lucky. In 2009, the Association of Jewish Studies convention was in Los Angeles. So I went. I was already doing research for Rav Hisda's daughter, and I knew which scholars I wanted to meet. And every single one of these scholars, Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, they all knew who I was. When I said I'm the author of Rashi's Daughters, they all knew. I found it rather amusing, some of the Orthodox ones, the reaction, "Oh, my wife loves your books." It's like, did he not read it, or he didn't want to admit that he read it? But they were all helpful. They answered my emails. They sent me PDFs of their journal articles. I really couldn't have done it without all the names that I acknowledge. Mm-hmm. And actually there's more people than I acknowledge, because there were some Orthodox ones who said, don't put their name in any place. Don't even associate me with your book. Even though they still continue. I mean, at a personal level, they're very helpful. I'm hoping that the Association of Jewish Studies will come back to Los Angeles again before I'm done, so that I can go back and thank them.
Okay. This book is part 1, as you mentioned, of Hisda's story. So can you tell us a little bit about part 2?
Book 1 is her childhood and marriage to the first husband and her being widowed. And so book 2, of course, is going to be her married to the second husband. The subtitle is Enchantress. She's no longer an apprentice. She is coming into her own. And the question is, how far does she want to go in becoming an enchantress? Is she just going to write amulets and write bowls and be kind of a mid-level enchantress? Or is she going to study with more powerful sorceresses and learn how to make physical changes in the world? Is she going to actually conjure demons? Is she going to have interactions with angels and demons personally? And political stuff. As she becomes more powerful, there's going to be other sorceresses who will feel threatened by her. I mean, the more powerful you become, the more powerful your enemies potentially are. So that's what I envision. Of course, it's a happy ending.
Okay.
There's enough horrible stuff that you can read for free in the newspaper. So one of my criteria in writing a book I want to read is it has to have a happy or satisfying ending. Some books you need 10 Kleenexes at the end, and I'm not saying that Romeo and Juliet is not a wonderful play, but that's not the kind of book that I want to read.
You're writing what you want to read, and you like happy endings. Fair enough.
Right.
Yeah, I like happy endings too.
For those people who are fans of Rashi's Daughters, I have to tell you that certainly Rav Hisda's Daughters will have romance. There'll be good sex scenes. I wrote the book I want to read. What can I say? Mm-hmm. She gets 2 husbands, so you get kind of like 2 romances with the same woman. Mm-hmm. I think there is perhaps a bit more romance in Rav Hisda's Daughters compared to Rashi's Daughters, because let's face it, part of her claim to fame is the 2 men that she ends up being married to are such powerful Jewish scholars and such well-known names in the Talmud.
So when is part 2 coming out? When can we expect to?
I expect it to be out in 2014. It takes me like 2 years because I'm constantly researching. I'm studying Talmud, which of course is the vast majority of my research at this point. And I do want to point out for readers who are reading Rav Hisda's Daughter, in the back I only list like maybe 5% of the Talmud scenes that the book is written on. Mm-hmm. And I do have a place on my website where I give the page number of the sugya for every passage, goes chapter by chapter, and you can find out where exactly that particular scene came from.
Okay. So do you really get a sense of their personalities through the Talmud? And you don't have to invent it all.
Oh, no, that's a great question. Yes. Most people who read Talmud are just looking for the arguments. They're not looking for who's saying what and how the argument goes. But I'm indebted to Richard Kalman, who teaches Talmud at JTS, who's really teased out the personalities of various sages. And there's no question that the interaction between the 2 rabbis who were her suitors, they hate each other. I mean, they insult each other. I mean, there's some Talmudic discussions that are just very normal, and then there's arguments. But these guys, it's beyond just a normal argument. Uh-huh. It's very interesting when you look at their arguments and see the animosity. When you realize they're both vying for the same woman, then it makes a lot of sense. And there's other rabbis who have different personalities who are clearly delineated. Rav Hisda is a very fastidious guy. Abaye is a really nice guy. He's a mensch. He's a real sweetheart. He never insults anybody. He has arguments throughout the Talmud with Rava. He loses all except 6. He never insults him. I mean, they always have very nice discussions. There are certain other rabbis who think the rabbis should be in charge of everything. And they make it very clear that they think the exilarch should be abolished, that the rabbis should be making all the rules. And there's places where the exilarch, has them executed. I mean, the exilarch's the king, right? You can't, that's treason. Uh-huh. And so there's definitely political views of different rabbis. Rava is much more open to talking with non-rabbinic Jews. There are certain rabbis that just don't even want to deal with these guys who are not rabbis and don't believe in the rabbis. Rava is out there in the community, and I think greatly responsible for the Jews who are non-rabbinic, seeing the rabbis in a good light. But there's no question that the rabbis who are mentioned a lot in the Talmud have personalities, have their little quirks, and
Cool. That's cool.
They're real people.
It's fun for you to be able to bring them to life with that spark already there.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. That's part of the fun of the research, is seeing this not as a bunch of, like, reading the Constitution or case law, seeing this as people really arguing and having their distinct personalities.
Okay. Well, this is great. Maggie Anton, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for finding the time to come over and talk with me.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Thank you. There are so many ways to connect with the Book of Life. Fan us at facebook.com/Book of Life Podcast. Follow us at twitter.com/Book of Life Pod. Email us at bookoflifepodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 561-206-2473. You can also listen to the latest episode by phone at 916-313-3820. And of course, find links to everything at bookoflifepodcast.com. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida at cbiboca.org and is supported in part by the Association of Jewish Libraries at jewishlibraries.org. Our background music is provided by the Freilach Makers Klezmer String Band at freilachmakers.com. Thanks for listening and happy reading.